Who do you suppose wrote these verses? Happy the man and happy he alone, he who can call today his own, he who secure within can say, tomorrow do they worse, for I have lived today. Those words sound modern, don't they? Yet they were written 30 years before Keats was born by the Roman poet Horace. One of the most tragic thing I know about human nature is that all of us tend to put off living. We all we are all dreaming of some magical rose garden over the horizon instead of enjoying the roses that are blooming outside our window today. Why are we such fools, such tragic fools? How strange it is, our little processions of life. I wrote Stephen Leacock, the child say, when I was a big boy, but when is that? But what is that? The big boy says, when I grow up, and then grown up, he say, when I get married, but to be married, what is that after all? The thought changes to when I was able to retire, and then when retirement comes, he looks back over the landscape traverse, a cold wind seems to sweep over it. Somehow he has missed it all and it is gone. Life we learn too late is in the living in the tissue of every day and hour. The late Edward S. Even of Detroit almost killed himself with worry before he learned that life is in the living in the tissue of every day and hour. Brought up in poverty, Edward Evans made his first money by selling newspaper, then worked as a grocer clerk later with seven people dependent upon him for bread and butter. He got a job as an assistant librarian. Small as the pay was, he was afraid to quit. 8 years passed before he could summon up the courage to start out his own. But once he started, he built up an original investment of 55 borrowed dollars into a business of his own that made him $20,000 a year. Then came a forest, a killing forest. He induced a big note for a friend, and the friend went bankrupt. Quickly on the top of that disaster came another. The bank in which he had all his money collapsed. He not only lost every cent he had, but was plunged into debt for $16,000. His nerves couldn't take it. I couldn't sleep or eat. He told me I became strangely ill, will worry and nothing but worry, he said, brought on his this illness. One day as I was walking down the street, I fainted and fell on the side I was on. No longer able to walk, I was put to bed and my body broke out in boils. These boils turned inward until just lying in bed was agony. I grew weaker every day. Finally, my doctor told me that I had only 2 more weeks to live. I was shocked. I drew up my will and then lay back in bed to await my end. No use now. No use now to struggle or worry. I gave up, relaxed, and went to sleep. I hadn't slept 2 hours in succession for weeks, but now, with my earthly problems drawing to an end, I slept like a baby. My exhausting weariness began to disappear. My appetite returned. I gained weight. A few weeks later, I was unable to walk with crutches. 6 weeks later, I was able to go back to work. I had been making $20,000 a year, but I was glad now to get a job for $30 a week. I got a job selling blocks to put behind the wheels of automobiles. When they are shipped by Friday, I had learned my lesson now. No more worry for me, no more regret about what had happened in the past, no more dread of the future. I concentrated all my time, energy, and enthusiasm into sailing those blocks. Edward S. Evans shot up fast now. In a few years, he was president of the company. His company, the Evans Product Company, has been listed on the New York Stock Exchange for years. When Edward Evans died in 1945, he was one of the most progressive businessman in the United States. If you ever fly over Greenland, you may land on Evans Field, a flying field named in his honor. Here is a point of the story. Edward S. Allen would never have had thrill of achieving these victories in business and in living if he hadn't seen the folly of worrying, if he hadn't learned to live in day-tight compartment. 500 years before Christ was born, the Greek philosopher Her- Heraclitus told his student that everything changes except the law of change. He said you cannot step in the same river twice. The river changes every second, and so does the man who step in it. Life is a ceaseless change. The only certainty is today when mar the beauty of living today by trying to solve the problem of a future that is shrouded in ceaseless change and uncertainty, a future that no one can possibly foretell. The old Romans had a word for it. In fact, they had two words for the old Romans had a word for it. In fact, they had two words for it: carpe diem, enjoy the day, or seize the day. Yes, seize the day and make the most of it. What is the philosophy of Lowell Thomas? I recently spent a weekend at his farm and I noticed that he had these words from Salem CS8 frame and hang on the wall of his broadcasting studio where he would see them often. This is the day which the Lord had made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. John Ruskin had on his desk a simple piece of stone on which was carved one word. Today and while I have a piece of stone on my desk, I do have a poem pasted on my mirror where I can see it when I shave every morning, a poem that Sir William Osier always kept on his desk, a poem written by the famous Indian dramatist Kalit, Kalidasa. Salutation to the dawn. Look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the verities and realities of your existence. The bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of achievement. For yesterday is but a dream, for tomorrow is only a vision. But today well lived makes yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well therefore to this day. Such is salutation to the dawn. So this is the first thing you should know about worry is this: if you want to it out of your little keep it out of your life, do what Sir William Austere did. Number one, shut the iron doors on the past and the future, live in the daytime compartment. Why not ask yourself these questions and write down the answers? Number one, do I tend to put off living in the present in order to worry about the future or to yearn for some magical rose garden over the horizon? Number two, Do I sometimes embitter the present by regretting things that happened in the past that are over and done with? Number two, do I get up in the morning determined to seize the day, to get the utmost of these 24 hours? Number four, can I get more out of life by living in a daytime compartment? Number five, when shall I start to do this? Next week, tomorrow, today? Chapter 2, a magic formula for solving worries situation. Would you like a quick, surefire recipe for handling worry situation? A technique you can start using right away before you can go any further in reading this book. Would you like a quick Then let me tell you about the method work out by Willis H. Carrier, the brilliant engineer who launched the air conditioning industry and who is now head of the world famous Carrier Corporation in Sy- Syracuse, New York. It is one of the best technique I ever heard for solving worry problems, and I got it from Mr. Carrier personally when we were having lunch together one day at the Engineers Club in New York. When I was a young man, Mr. Carrier said, I work for the Buffalo Fork Company in Buffalo, New York. I was handed the assignment of installing a gas cleaning device in a plant of the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company at Crystal City, Missouri, a plant consisting millions of dollars. The purpose of this installation was to remove the impurities from the gas so it could be burned without in injuring the engines. This method of cleaning gas was new. It had been tried only once before and under different conditions. In my work at Crystal City, Missouri, unforeseen difficulties arose. It worked after a fashion, but not well enough to meet the guarantee we had made. I was stunned by my failure. It was almost as if someone had stuck me a blow on the head. My stomach, my inside began to twist and turn. For a while, I was so worried I couldn't sleep. Finally, common sense reminded me that worry wasn't getting me anywhere. So I figured out a way to handle my problem without worrying. It works superbly. I have been using this same anti worry technique for more than 30 years. It is simple, anyone can use it. It consists of three steps. Step one, I analyze the situation fearlessly, honestly, and figure out what was the worst that could possibly happen as a result of this failure. No one was going to jail me and shoot me. That was certain true. There was a chance that I would lose my position, and there was also a chance that my employer would have to remove the machinery and lose the $20,000 we had invested. Step 2, after figuring out what was the worst that could possibly happen, I reconcile myself to accepting it. If necessary, I said to myself, this failure will be a blow to my record and it might possibly mean the loss of my job. But if it does, I can always get another position. Conditions could be much worse, and as far as my employers are concerned, well, they realize that we are experimenting with a few methods of cleaning gas, and if this experience costs them $20,000, they can stand it. They can charge it up to the research for it is an experiment. After discovering the worst that could possibly happen and reconcile myself to accepting it, if necessary, an extremely important thing happened. I immediately relaxed and felt a sense of peace. that I hadn't experienced in days. Step 3. From that time on, I calmly devoted my time and energy to trying to improve upon the worst which I had already accepted mentally. I now tried to figure out ways and means by which I might reduce the loss of $20,000 that we face. I made several tests and finally figured out that if we spend another 5,000 for additional equipment, our problem would be solved. We did this, and instead of the farm losing 20,000, we made 15,000. I probably would never have been able to do this if I had kept on worrying. Because one of the worst features about worrying is that it destroys our ability to concentrate. When we worry, our mind jump here and there and everywhere, and we lose all power of decision. However, when we force ourselves to face the worst and accept it mentally, we then eliminate all those vague imagination and put ourselves in a position in which we are able to concentrate in our problem. This incident that I have related occurred many years ago. I worked so superbly that I have been using it ever since, and as a result, my life has been almost completely free from worry. Now, this is Willis H. Carrier magic formula, so valuable and so practical, psychological, psychologically speaking, because it yanks us down out of the great gray cloud in which we fumble around when we are blinded by worry. It plants our feet good and solid on the earth. We know where we stand, and if we haven't solid ground under us, how in creation can we ever hope to think anything through? Professor William James, the father of applied psychology, has been dead for 38 years, but if he were alive today, he could hear his formula for facing the worst. He would heartily approve it, but do I know that because he told his own student, be willing to have it so, be willing to have it so. He said, because acceptance of what has happened is the first step in overcoming the consequences of any misfortune. The same idea was expressed by Lin Yuteng in his widely read book, The Importance of Living True Peace of Mind, said this Chinese philosopher, come from accepting the word psychologically. I think it means a release of energy. That's it. Exactly psychologically, it means a new release of energy when we have accepted the worst. We have nothing more to lose, and that automatically means we have everything to gain. After facing the worst, Willis H. Carrier reported, I immediately relaxed and felt a sense of peace when I hadn't experienced in days. From that time on, I was able to think. Makes sense, doesn't it? Yet millions of people have wrecked their lives in angry turmoil because they refuse to accept the worst, refuse to try to improve upon it, refuse to salvage what they could from the wreck. Instead of trying to reconstruct their fortune, they engage in a bitter and violent contest with experience and ended up victims of that brooding fixation known as melancholia. Would you like to see how someone else adopted Willis H. Carrier magic formula and applied to applied it to his own problem. Well, here is a one example from a New York oil dealer who was a student in my classes. I was being blackmailed. This student begins, I didn't believe it was possible. I didn't believe it could happen outside of the movies, but I was actually being blackmailed. What happened was this: the oil company of which I was the head had a number of delivery trucks and a number of drivers at that time. OPA regulation were strictly enforced, and we were re- retained on the amount of oil we could deliver to any one of our customer. I didn't know it, but it seems that certain of our drivers had been delivering oil short to our regular customer and then reselling the surplus to the customer of their own. The first inkling I had of these illegitimate transaction was when a man who claimed to be government inspector came to see me one day and demanded hush money. He had got documentary proof of what our drivers had been doing, and he threatened to turn this proof over to the district attorney office if I didn't cough up. I knew, of course, that I had nothing to worry about personally, at least, but I also knew that the law states a firm is responsible for the action of its employees. What's more, I knew that if the case came to court and it was aired in the newspaper, the bad publicity would ruin my business, and I was proud of my business. It had been founded by my father 25 years before. I was so worried I was sick. I didn't eat or sleep for 3 days and night. I kept going around in crazy circles. Should I pay the money, $5,000, or should I tell this man to go ahead and do this damnest, damnedest? Either way, I tried to make up my mind. I ended in nightmare. Then on Sunday night, happened to pick up the booklet on how to stop worrying, which I had been giving in my Carnegie class in public speaking. I started to read it and came across the story of Willis H. Carrier. Face the worst, it said so. I asked myself, what's the worst that can happen if I refuse to pay up? And these blackmailers turns their records over to district attorney. The answer to that was the ruin of my business. That the worst that can happen, I can go to jail. All that can happen is that I shall be ruined by the publicity. I then said to myself, all right, the business is ruined. I accept that mentally. What happens next? Well, with my business ruined, I would probably have to look for a job that wasn't bad. I knew a lot about oil. There were several firms that might be glad to employ me. I began to feel better. The blue funk I had been in for 3 days night began to lift a little. My emotion calmed down, and to my astonishment, I was able to think. I was clear headed enough now to face step 3, improve on the words as I wrote, as I thought of solution. An entirely new angle presented itself to me. If I told my attorney the whole situation, he might find a way out which I hadn't thought of. I knew it sounds stupid to say that this hadn't even occurred to me before, but of course I hadn't been thinking. I had only been worrying. I immediately made up my mind that I would see my attorney first thing in the morning, and then I went to bed and slept like a log. How did it end? Well, the next morning, my lawyer told me to go and see the district attorney and tell him the truth. I did precisely that. When I finished, I was astonished to hear the DA, district attorney, say that this blackmail racket had been going on for months and that the man who claimed to be government agent was a crook wanted by the police. What a relief to hear all this after I had tormented myself for 3 days and nights wondering whether I should hand over $5,000 to this professional swindler. This experience taught me a lasting lesson. Now, wherever I face a pressing problem that threatens to worry me, I give it what I call the old Willis H. Cornier formula. I just about the same time Willis H. Cornier was running over the gas cleaning equipment he was installing in a plant in Crystal City, Missouri. A chap from Broken Bow, Nebraska was making out his will. His name was Earl P. Haney, and he had duodenal euchre. Three doctors, including a celebrated euchre specialist, had pronounced Mr. Haney an incurable case. They had told him not to eat this or that, or not to worry, or free to keep perfectly calm. They also told him to make out his will. These youths these ulcers had already forced Earl P. Haney to give up a fine and highly paid position. So now he had nothing to do, nothing to look forward to except a lingering death. Then he made a decision, a rare and superb decision, since I have only a little while to live. He said, I may as well make most of it. I have always wanted to travel around the world before I die. If I am ever going to do it, I'll have to do it now. So he brought his ticket. The doctor was appalled. We must warn you, they said to Mr. Haney, that if you do take this trip, you will be buried at sea. No, I won't, he replied. I have promised my relatives that I will be buried in my family plot at Broken Bow, Nebraska, so I'm going to buy a casket and take it with me. He purchased a casket, put it aboard ship, and then made agreement with the steamship company in the event of his death to put his corpse in a freezing compartment and keep it there till the liner returned home. He set up on his trip imbued with the spirit of old Umar. Oh, make the most of what we yet may span before we too into the dust descend, dust into dust and under dust to lie. Sense vain, sense songs, sense singer, and sense end. However, he didn't make the trip sense wine. I drank highballs and smoked long cigars on that trip, Mr. Hennessy in a letter that I have before me now. I ate all kind of food, even a strange native food, which were granted to kill me. I enjoyed myself more than I had in years. We ran into monsoons and typhoons, which should have put me in my casket, if only from fright. But I got an enormous kick out of all this adventure. I played games aboard the ship, sang songs, made new friends, stayed up half the night. When we reached China and India, I realized that the business troubles and cares that I had faced back home were paradise compared to the poverty and hunger in the Orient. I stopped all my senseless worrying and felt fine. When I got back to America, I had gained 90 pounds. I had almost forgotten I had ever had a stomach ulcer. I had never felt better in my life. I promptly sold the casket back to the undertaker and went back to business. I haven't been ill a day since. At the time this happened, Earl P. Hanley had Never even heard of Willis Edge Carrier and his technique for handling worry. But I realize now he told me quite recently that I was unconsciously using the self same principle. I reconcile myself to the worst that could happen in my case, dying, and then I improve upon it by trying to get the utmost enjoyment out of my life for the time I had left. If he continued, if I had gone on. Worrying after boarding that ship, I have no doubt that I would have made the return voyage inside of the coffin, but I relax, I forget it, and this calmness of mind gave me a new birth of energy which actually saved my life. Earl P. Haney is now living at 52 Windgimmer Ave, Winchester, Mass. Now, if Billy's Edge Carrier could save a $20,000 contract, if a New York businessman could save himself from blackmail, if Earl P. Haney could actually save his life by using this magic formula, then isn't possible that it may be the answer to some of your troubles, isn't it? Possible that it may even solve some problems you thought were unsolvable.